So good morning, good afternoon, and in Truman Show style, in case I don't see you later, good night. My name is Richard Duffy. I am the product evangelist here at Acumatica, and I'd like to welcome you to what is the first of our series of webinars in what we're calling our Cloud Technology series. Today's webinar is really focused on strategies for managing data privacy and security. Not necessarily so much in the cloud, because this is not going to be a technical session, so I'm not going to sit here and start taking you through data encryption algorithms and start getting into deep technical discussions. But really what I want to do is talk about these strategies in the context of being part of a cloud-enabled world, being part of an interconnected environment where you are really in a situation where you can remain connected to the internet 24 hours a day, 7 days a week from a variety of devices, and know that your data is being protected and secured, and be working with customers, be working with suppliers, be working with all kinds of different constituents in your ecosystem, and know that their data is also being secured and protected as well. So then if we think about the agenda for today's presentation, I really want to focus on a couple of things, and I'm not going to give you death by PowerPoint, all right? So the idea for today's webinar is that we'll be talking together for around about 25 to 30 minutes, just depending on how carried away I might get on some of these topics, but I do want to make sure that when the information I'm giving you is valuable. So please feel free at any stage during the presentation to ask a question using the Q&A pod, and I will endeavor to answer those questions during the session or at the end of the session. Now, one of the other things that I'm going to do today is I'm going to be taking you through a whole range of resources and a whole range of additional reading and additional content that you can potentially utilize to help you as you move along your journey towards securing and protecting your data and your customers' information inside your organization. So at the end of today's presentation, I will also be putting together a blog which will follow on from today's session with a whole range of additional resources that you can go and visit to increase that knowledge. All right, so I just wanted to set that expectation up front. That there will be quite a lot of content I'm going to talk about, and you will have the option to access the links for that after today's session. So what we're really going to do is we're going to talk about what I believe is fundamentally, and what most security and data privacy experts believe is the weakest link in any data privacy and security discussion. We're then going to lead on from that and talk about how you can start to utilize policies in your organization. And I'm not talking about Active Directory group policies or those kinds of things, although they do play a part if you're operating on a Windows network environment and you're setting up security policies. But I'm really more talking about general policies, and we'll have the discussion on what's the difference between a policy and a guideline, for example, and a recommendation, because I think one of the things that's important when you're talking about data privacy and security, one of the things that's important is to be clear, is to be precise, and to leave no, if you like, no ambiguity in the way that you talk about these things inside your organization, because ambiguity or lack of clarity is one of the biggest challenges that many people face when they're looking at this whole discussion around how do I secure my data. How do I ensure that the customer data that I am responsible for managing, how do I ensure that that is protected? We're then going to talk about building on some best practices. We're going to talk a little bit about getting back to the basics, because in the 25 years that I've been involved in this industry, I think the fundamentals of data privacy, the fundamentals of security have not really changed. And the biggest problems that organizations face have not really changed either. Going back to the basics in some respects, while it sounds very, very trite to say it, and it sounds very simplistic, you'll often find it's the basic things that many organizations are missing that contribute to some of the biggest challenges that they have. We're then going to talk about the expectation that people have that there is a technology answer for every problem. However, some of these problems are not technology related. Then I'm going to sum up and make some final observations and do a Q&A, and then we'll go from there. So hopefully that meets everybody's expectation for the time that we're going to spend together today. I am not going to be talking about Acumatica, all right? Even though this webinar presentation is presented by Acumatica, I'm not going to be talking about Acumatica products, all right? I'm not going to be demonstrating Acumatica's cloud enterprise resource planning software. If your expectation was that you were going to get a demo of that, I do hate to disappoint you. But every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, we do run a dedicated session on that. So just again to make sure that everybody's expectations are clear, today is not an Acumatica product demo. I'm not even going to talk about our product apart from what I've just said there. Maybe I might make a reference to how we secure data inside our solution as an example, but we'll see how we go. So, what is the weakest link? Well, if you think about all of these different things that I have up here on this particular slide, when we think about data security, when we think about data privacy, we start having discussions about all kinds of different topics. And I have worked for some of the largest organizations in the world. My last 11 years I spent at SAP. Prior to that, I was at Microsoft, and for 15 years prior to that, I ran my own IT consulting company delivering accounting software and enterprise resource planning software to small and mid-sized enterprises. But in the last 11 years at SAP, I mean, we had a team in excess of about 100 people whose job it was to focus on nothing but data security and data privacy management. And a lot of the things that were being done were focused on some of these really specific topics. For example, social engineering. So what is social engineering? Well, social engineering is a technique that is practiced by, in many instances, organized criminals, where they go through a very specific process and a very specific training process to train up people to be able to ring into your organization. And by arming themselves with a small amount of information and by taking a certain approach, they're able to get people to share additional information about usernames, about passwords, about other people in the organization, about username policies. It's by simply doing things like, I want to send such and such a person an email. Could you give me their email address? And they hand over the email address, and then the person says, well, could you tell me, do you have an email address policy there? Do you use a certain standard if I wanted to send an email to somebody else? Yeah, we do. We use first name dot last name at, companyx.com. Okay, great. And is that related to the usernames that you use? I mean, we use our email addresses as our usernames at our company. Do you guys do the same thing? It's a very friendly conversation, and it sounds on the surface very innocuous, but what's happening in the background? Well, that information is all being captured, tracked, and fed in to some pretty sophisticated software that's sitting there trying to do brute force attacks to get through databases. And we see even the biggest companies in the world are subject to this kind of attack. You may be aware one of the things that's hit the newswire in the last 24 to 48 hours is a breach that occurred at eBay in, I think it was March, if I remember correctly from what I read on the wire this morning, where they're saying, thousands, hundreds of thousands of users' details may have been compromised. They don't believe usernames and passwords were retrieved, but names, addresses, phone numbers, all that kind of thing. And the recommendation right now is go in and change your username and password if you're using that service. So, you know, these things that take constant vigilance to look at. And that social engineering process is also then linked to this concept of data phishing. Okay, if you think about phishing, phishing and freaking were two hacker terms that were used, really came to the fore probably in the Jeepers Creepers. I'm just trying to think. There was one really high-profile hacker who was really the first hacking superstar, who the FBI arrested him and they put him into jail, and I can't remember his name now. I'm sorry, but you know, back in the late 90s, I think he came to notoriety, and this whole process of phishing and freaking, both spelt with a PH, was really around utilizing telecommunications technology to capture data and then misuse it. So, you know, again, people look at that and they say, well, this is a technology problem. Well, I question, is it really a technology problem? Then you look at simple things like physical security. When you are inside your organization, when you go home at night, what happens to the important data that is kept inside your organization? Now, you might be sitting there and thinking, well, you know what, I run a very small business. You know, I got 6 or 7 employees. Who would want to break into my business and steal my information? Well, people might not be breaking into your business to steal the information. They might be breaking into your business to steal computers or to steal, you know, printers or whatever the case may be. But in that process, they unwittingly or wittingly or deliberately, they end up taking the information about your customers, information about your business, information that can be used to perpetrate identity theft, information that can be used and in some cases can be tracked back to your organization as the source of that information. Now, what's the big challenge today? The big challenge today is right now legislators are contemplating making this the responsibility of company officers. So if you are a company owner, if you are a company director, if that computer gets stolen from your company and it contains data that is not sufficiently protected and gets used for illegal purposes and can be tracked back to your company as the source, you can be personally held liable and you can be prosecuted. So these are the kinds of things that people are looking at today. Now, why are they considering these topics? Well, it's gotten to the point now where I think people are recognizing that the weakest link in any security policy, the weakest link in any data security or data privacy strategy is people. So it's not an IT problem per se. You can put into place the best IT policies. You can put into place the best IT systems. But at the end of the day, it always comes down to making sure that you have the right people in your organization. Those people understand how important it is for you to maintain good security policies, for you to maintain good security processes. Even simple things like if you see somebody walking around inside the organization, don't accept that just because they look very comfortable as they walk around, don't accept that they should actually be inside your company, that they should be inside your office. Always ask. It is an incredibly simple thing to do, but most people don't do it. Does everybody in your organization, if you are of significant enough size that you don't necessarily know everybody in the company, as soon as you get to the point where you cannot identify everyone in your organization by looking at them and know who they are, then you need to start introducing some kind of identity badging system and a visitor identification system so that you can make sure that you know who is walking through your organization. And then you need to go one step further. Let's talk about physical security for a second. Now, we all know the basics of physical security when it comes to protecting information, I'm pretty sure. If you think about your PC, when you walk away from your PC, do you leave the screen open with data up on the screen? Or do you have some kind of screensaver which kicks in? Now, when you come back from the screensaver, does it ask you for your password? And how long before that screensaver actually kicks in? How long after you last interacted with the computer does the screensaver kick in? Is it 1 minute? Is it 10 minutes? Is it half an hour? Even these kind of simple things can make a big difference. And I'm not just talking about accessing or people incorrectly accessing data about your customers. But think about it. If you are a finance professional and you are sitting there and you are pulling information about the money that your customers owe you or money that you owe your suppliers. Somebody calls you away from your desk for a minute, you leave your accounting software up open on a screen, potentially you are violating legislation by people being able to go and even see that information on your screen. Now, it's a fine line between paranoia and protection. But the interesting thing with this is that for many people, paranoia is preferable to litigation. So sometimes you are better off to err on the side of being overprotective, particularly when it comes to these things. Governments, the European Union, all of these different industries and associations have different rules, guidelines, policies, and legislation to cover how you do all of these things. You must be aware of what those are. So, an available resource for you if you're here in the United States, for example, and I'm going to share quite a few others with you. A great resource to visit, you can see it here on the screen, is staysafeonline.org. Now, the great things about a lot of these websites that I'm going to point you to, many of them are driven by government departments, many of them are driven by industry associations, others provide information as a vendor of security products. So again, educating their customers to the problem so that they can then provide a solution and show that their solution addresses that problem. There's a lot of these resources available to you, and they cover things not only from a personal perspective, but also from a business perspective. How many of you, if you have employees with laptop computers, when that laptop computer goes home with your employee, how many of you know who is accessing that computer at your employee's home? Maybe they're giving their computer to their kids to use to do their homework. And as part of that process, their kids go out onto the internet. And maybe their kids go out and start downloading software because they don't know not to do that. Have you had that discussion? Do you have a policy in your organization that makes it clear to people what it is okay and not okay to do with that equipment when they take it home? Now, some of these things might sound pretty draconian, but again, there's nothing worse than realizing you should have done these things after it is too late. So let's then talk about that in a little bit more detail. Let's talk about the importance of policies, because policies are all about ignoring the ignorance defense. What do I mean by ignoring the ignorance defense? I'm sorry, I didn't know. I'm sorry, I wasn't aware. I didn't think that that would be a problem. No one told me that I shouldn't do that. So, you know, this whole problem of solving the weakest link, which is about your people, is really about making sure that you have some of the basics in place. Now, a really great place to go is the Federal Trade Commission's website. Now, I don't care if you're in the US or if you're in Europe or if you're in Australia. The assumption here is that you can understand English, which I assume if you're on this webinar and you're listening to me, then you do understand English, although you might have a little bit of difficulty deciphering my atrocious Australian accent. And if you are having difficulties, I do apologize. But the Federal Trade Commission is responsible for consumer protection in the United States. So they provide a whole lot of information about what you can do to protect information, not only how you can take action to protect yourself as a consumer, but also if you are a business, how you can make sure you're taking the necessary steps to protect the information that your customers, who are consumers, share with you. And one of the things that they talk about is they talk about a 5-step process for data security. Now, you can take any one of these things and you can put it into a policy. I'll talk about that in a second. But they talk about a 5-step process for data security. And if you follow this URL, which I'll share with you in my blog post afterwards, you'll see that they have a complete set of multimedia training videos that take you through the process in very, very simple terms. They even give you the ability to take that video and embed it in your own company website. So, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which way you look at it, there is no longer an excuse for the ignorance defense, because there are so many resources that you can find just by doing a quick Google search and searching for data security policies or data privacy protection. You search for those kinds of things on Google and you will be absolutely amazed at how much information is out there that can help you solve this problem. Now, you might be big enough and complex enough to need to go out and employ a data security and data privacy consulting company, and there's lots of those companies out there who can come in and for an hourly fee they can come in and consult to you and make some recommendations. But I guarantee you, at the bare minimum, they're going to have some of these things in place, some of the things that I'm about to talk to you about. So then the 5-step process that the FTC recommend is, first of all, take stock. Look at what information you are actually tracking. Look at what information you are storing. Are you aware of the information that you're storing? For example, are you storing your customers' credit card numbers? Did you know that when you store customer credit card numbers, you are subject to a whole range of additional security policies and guidelines that if you are not following them, you are open to potentially fines worth hundreds of thousands of dollars and potentially prison terms for company officers if you do not take the appropriate steps to secure that. Now, here's the good news. With credit cards, there are a number of services that you can utilize that enable you to take credit cards but never actually store the credit card number yourself. For example, I'm going to talk about our own product for a minute. Inside Acumatica, our cloud ERP solution, we work with an external service that has been validated and checked by all of the necessary organizations called Authorize.net. What Authorize.net does is when a customer provides you with a credit card and your person is putting that credit card number into the accounting system to go ahead and authorize a payment, the accounting system never actually records that credit card. what happens is that credit card number is taken, encrypted, passed across to authorized.net, and what they do is they use very sophisticated security algorithms to create what's called a token, and that token is then a representation in non-readable format of what that credit card number is. That token then gets stored in the accounting system, not the credit card number. So there are technology solutions to addressing many of these things. However, step one is to be aware of it, and that's why you need to take stock of what you're doing. Step number two, scale it down. Look at the information that you're storing. Look at the information that you are gathering. Are you keeping the bare minimum of information that you need for that information to be effective? Are you capturing too much information about your customers? Are you capturing too much information without their permission? And I don't mean maliciously now. I mean just in the normal course of day-to-day business, information is being gathered. Go and take a look at that information and decide, is this something I really need? Is this something I need to have stored inside my organization? And if not, get rid of it. And that's actually step number 4. But after you've decided, you've seen what information you're tracking, you cut it back, the information that you've got, you must make sure it's secured. To all of your filing cabinets in your organization that contain important customer information, that contain customer financial information, that contain names, addresses, dates of birth, potentially social security numbers, is all that information sitting in locked filing cabinets? If I was to walk into your office right now and walk into unattended offices that had those filing cabinets in them, would I just be able to walk up to those filing cabinets, open them up, and take that information out? If the answer is yes, then you have a problem. So you need to lock that information up. The fourth thing you can do is, if you don't need it, get rid of it. You can have any paperwork securely shredded. You are all no doubt aware that there are many different organizations, companies like Iron Mountain, who specialize in this. Not only do they offer online data backup and security and storage facilities, but they also offer things like secured shredding. You can even take documents down to your local Office Depot, and depending on whether, and this is not a recommendation, by the way, anytime I mention one of these companies or services, please bear in mind it is not a recommendation that they are the companies that you should use. It is purely an example of some of these organizations. You need to do your own due diligence and determine whether or not they are the right people for you to use. I'm just giving them as examples. But you can take it down to Officeworks, or Office Depot. Officeworks is an Australian company. You can take it down to Office Depot, and they have a secure shredding bin that's locked, and they have it cleared away at the end of every day, and that data, that paper taken away and securely shredded. Of course, they have to have that for their own purposes, because they are potentially producing confidential documentation which they need to shred as well. But those services are there. Even just simple things like going ahead and investing in a cross-cut shredding machine. Now, if your information is secure, if your information is really valuable, don't underestimate the fact that people will go dumpster diving. It sounds funny, and it sounds like it's the topic for a science fiction movie or a spy thriller, but people will go diving through your dumpster to try and find information. I know of small companies where that has happened, where they've been involved in some kind of litigation, or they've been involved in some kind of dispute over something totally unrelated, where the people with whom they're in a dispute go to unusual lengths to try and find ways of getting back at those organizations. So get rid of it. If you don't need it, get rid of it, but get rid of it securely. And importantly, plan ahead. Be prepared for what will happen if by chance your data security is compromised. Be prepared if by chance your data privacy is breached. Okay, and again, there are lots of different ways. I could talk for the next 4 or 5 hours about all the different ways that you could do this. But my purpose today is to give you some pointers and some guidelines and some things that you can look at to get you started on this journey. But you must plan ahead and have a risk mitigation plan. Have a way of managing the incident if it occurs inside your organization. Now, let's just talk about policies for a second, because the best place to start is to make sure you have data security policies in place. So the best way to start off with a policy is you can begin with a policy template. Now, the screenshot that you can see here right now is just a simple policy template that I found by doing an internet search, okay? And I will make this one available to you because it's a publicly available policy template, and there are organizations who specialize in providing these kind of templates for everything from data security to data privacy to remote access policies to data encryption policies, all of which are a great place to start. Some people offer them for free. There are services where you can go out and buy these policies. You know, you can buy the basic policy template for, you know, $40 or $50, which can be enough to save you hours and hours and hours of work in doing these things. Because for many people, the biggest challenge with this is finding the time to get it done. On top of all the other things that you have to do, now all of a sudden you've got to write down and create all these policies. Well, you don't have to. You can start with these best practice guidelines. Now, on the subject of guidelines, I want to make sure it's very, very clear that the way that you describe these things inside your organization is also critical. Again, it sounds funny, and maybe, you know, I'm sounding like I'm Mr. Pedantic. You know, I'm really worried about the wording. But with these things, the wording is critical. The information that you provide, is it a policy, a standard, or a guideline? And what's the difference between these things? So if you think about it, a policy is typically a document that outlines specific requirements or rules that must be met. All right? For example, an acceptable use policy covers the rules and regulations for using the computing facilities, including internet access. All right? And in the information or network security area, these policies are usually point-specific and cover a single area. For example, what I just gave you, a policy about internet usage inside the organization, a policy about laptop utilization outside the organization, a policy that covers how that technology equipment should be stored and cared for whilst traveling. All of these different kinds of things. Now, what's the difference between a policy and a standard? Well, a standard is usually a collection of system-specific or procedural-specific requirements that must be met by everyone. Give you an example, you might have a standard way of describing how you need to harden a Windows 8.1 workstation if you're going to put it in an external network. And the idea behind the standard is people must follow it if they wish to do that, if they wish to install that Windows 8.1 workstation on an external network segment. So again, you know, standards are things that must be followed. All right? There is no exception. There is no option. If you're going to do this, you must follow the standard. Now, just in case you're thinking, well, what do you mean by hardening a Windows 8.1 workstation? Hardening is typically a process that you go through where you lock down the operating system and you take advantage of all the built-in security functions that are available. And with today's modern operating systems, you can even get free tools provided in the operating system or provided by the vendor that will run a wizard and will go through the process of locking down the computer. All right? So these things are not as difficult as they may sound. They're not as technical as they may sound. However, like all things, they do take time and they do have an impact in the business. We'll talk about that in a second. Now, what's a guideline? Well, a guideline is typically a collection of system or procedural specific suggestions for best practice. So again, you could consider what I'm doing right now is I'm giving you a whole series of guidelines. I'm not setting any standards because I don't have the ability to enforce them. And I'm not setting any policies because I'm not an officer of your company. So it's not my responsibility, nor do I have the authority to set policies. But I can provide you with some guidelines. They're not requirements that you have to meet, but they're strongly recommended. And if you think about it, effective security policies make frequent references to both standards and guidelines that exist within an organization. So it's a combination of all these things that help you address the weakest link in your organization, which is about your people. All right? There are other things available as well. On the previous page, I referred you to staysafeonline.org. They even have things like personal security risk calculators and workplace security risk calculators. Things that you can do which are very, very quick, which serve the purpose of just educating people inside your organization to some of the things that they might not necessarily think about as they go about their day-to-day activity, but by putting these in front of people, by putting them on your intranet, by putting links to them, sending them out in an all-hands email, asking people to go and visit them and spend 5 minutes just going through these things, even these basic things can be enough just to make people stop and think before they act. There's a philosophy, think before you click. When you open an email, have you taught your people, before you click on a hyperlink, go through a couple of quick processes, a couple of quick thought processes. Should this information be coming to me? If I received a thing about a traffic violation or, a credit card fraud or a credit card risk, am I really likely to have been impacted by this? When you hover over the hyperlink, does it come up with an address that does not look like it's related to that particular topic? The simple things you can do, and again, there's probably about 20 things that you can teach people to do that I'm not going to go through them one by one, but a simple search on the internet. Do a search for email security guidelines, okay, and you will find some documents that you can share with your people that say, hey, think before you click, do this, do this, do this. And even on that site I've given you, that staysafeonline.org, if memory serves, they have a link there which actually gives people some guidance on that specific topic. All right? So, ignorance is no excuse. The internet security industry does a regular report on all of the threats that are going on at any given point in time. Now, the 2014 Internet Security Threat Report made a couple of key findings. And yeah, I could go through these one by one, but I'm just going to pick a couple. I mean, let's just look at the first two. A 91% increase in targeted attacks in 2013. That's targeted attacks through phishing, through social engineering, those kinds of things. I've been on the receiving end of a number of these. Think about it. If you have a Skype account, okay, have you had somebody ring you up telling you they're from Microsoft or some other vendor and you have a virus on your computer and all you have to do is grant them access and they're going to clean it up for you free of charge? I get probably one of those calls a week that come through on my Skype account, and it drives me insane. But, you know, you and I might sit there and think, well, nobody in their right mind would accept that call and give an unknown person access to their computer. Well, guess what? They do. And they do it because they're not informed, because no one's told them, because no one's given them a background on some of the things to be aware of. We assume, as information technology professionals, some of us on this call, that people should just know that. But it's our responsibility to make sure that they do know it and they do understand it. So a 62% increase in the number of breaches in 2013, and already we've heard about a couple of high-profile ones, the breach that occurred at Target, the breach that's just been publicized this week, you know, from some of the largest companies in the world. Okay, so this is increasing. 38% of mobile users have experienced some kind of mobile cybercrime in the past 12 months. Do not expect that because it's a simple device like a smartphone that it cannot be penetrated, that it cannot be hacked, that the information that you store, the information that you put in when you are using your online banking, do not assume that that information is secure. Don't store your PIN numbers in documents on your computer. And if you are, make sure you have your computer encrypted. Now, here's a couple of points. I'm a computer user too, all right? And I find it incredibly frustrating having to change my password every 90 days. I find it incredibly frustrating that it has to be longer than 8 characters, and it has to be a combination of letters, numbers, and non-alphanumeric characters, and that I can't use any of the 5 passwords that I used before. And I watch people go through this process all the time, and they come up with these crazy passwords, their birthdays, their children's names, their name, the company name. They put those into passwords. And they get frustrated when the policies don't allow them to do that. Well, again, those policies exist for a reason. I once read a computer manual which talked about data security, for example. What's one of the key things you can do to ensure your data security? Do your backups. Okay, do you back up every day? And is your backup information secured? This manual had a line in it. Have you done a backup? There are only 2 kinds of people in the world, those who have lost data and those who are going to lose data. So it's going to happen to you. Have you taken the necessary steps to protect that information? So again, the good news is, with all of these challenges and risks that exist out there, you know what? You can take action at very low or no cost to do the basics to protect yourselves. And where are some of the best practices you can find? Again, government departments, I've already talked about some of these, like the Federal Trade Commission, the Bureau of Consumer Protection, you know, security software vendors, and here's just a couple, organizations like Sophos, who have, that was the company where I found that, that data security template that I had on the previous slide. NextLabs, Symantec, these are organizations that you're probably familiar with. Chances are you may even have their software on your PC. But is it up to date? Has your subscription to the latest virus and malware signatures expired? When that expiration message comes up, what do people do about that? Do they just click ignore, or do they take some action? If you belong to an industry organization, a lot of these industry organizations have great information, and with most of this stuff, you know what? They don't even gate it, right? So if it's guidance on how to protect yourself and your data against security breaches and against fraud, usually they don't hide that away. It's easily accessible. And why shouldn't it be, right? It in and of itself is not necessarily a security risk. It's there to help. So if you're a healthcare professional, I guarantee you, if you're a nurse, if you're a doctor, if you're a you know, a physiotherapist or whatever the case may be, some kind of healthcare professional, I guarantee you your professional association has all the documentation you need to be able to implement and understand what's required of you to meet all of the industry legal requirements around data protection and data security. There's also security contractors. These organizations, sorry about that, I got a little bit tongue-tied there. These organizations can come in and work with you for a fee to help you put in place these kinds of policies and procedures. But again, it doesn't have to cost you a fortune to do the basics. All right, so we're getting near the end of our session, and hopefully I've been able to give you some guidelines and some hints and some things to think about as you operate in an internet-connected world and you are thinking about how do you protect your information and your customers' information. Again, as I mentioned, today's session is not about giving you a demonstration of Acumatica, our cloud ERP software. But as an example, we take this whole topic of data security very, very seriously. And if you would like to know more about this, please visit our website at www.acumatica.com. We just shared, for example, a document about how we deliver our software as a service. This is where the software and the data is stored on one of our cloud servers. And we have documentation which explains how we protect it, how we back it up, what are all the policies we have in place to guide and protect our servers from unauthorized physical access. So there's a whole range of that information there. We talk about how we protect our systems with encryption certificates and so on and so forth. So I'd encourage you to go out and visit that website and grab that information. So hopefully you found today's session to be of value. Again, my name is Richard Duffy. I am not only the product evangelist here at Acumatica, I'm also the Vice President of Partner Strategy Enablement. We work with companies of all sizes, from the very smallest business up to the large Fortune 1000 companies. So we have a whole range of different organizations who look to us for this kind of information. So it's been a pleasure to share this with you. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me at rduffy@acumatica.com. If you registered for today's webinar, I will be sending you an email afterwards with a link to the blog where you can find some of these resources, or you can just visit www.acumatica.com/blogs and give it 2 days, and I will have that blog up with a whole range of additional resources that you can utilize to go out and learn more about data security and data privacy. So with that, before we wrap up, I would like to take a couple of seconds and quickly take a look at our questions and answers and see if we do have some questions. And I can see we do have a couple of questions. One moment. All right. So the question is, what recommendations might I have for bring your own device best practice guidelines? Well, I'm glad you asked that question. The answer to that question is, I'm not going to talk about it right now, but on my blog post, I will give you a link to a specific document which talks about this whole concept of bring your own device. And for those of you who are not sure what bring your own device means, you might often see it referred to as BYOD, okay, as opposed to BYOG, bring your own grog. Bring your own device is where you allow people inside your organization to bring their own smartphones, bring their own computers into the organization and use those for interacting with your information systems. So that has a whole layer of its own policies that need to be in place around that. Why? Because potentially people can then be taking information about your customers off-site on their own personal computer, and you potentially, unless you have documents, procedures and policies in place to help you manage it, you potentially have no way of knowing what's going to happen with that data. If that person's laptop gets stolen, do you know whether or not that data is encrypted? There's a whole range of ways you can do that, a whole range of very inexpensive solutions you can now use so that you can, with your employees' agreement, put in place remote wipe technology, put in place data encryption technology to make sure that the data that they take, which is related to the business, is encrypted. So the document I'll share with you will actually talk about a whole bunch of those different things. So That's really our only question. Now, I said I was only going to talk for about 25 minutes to half an hour, but again, as always happens whenever I start presenting, I get carried away. So I've got a lot more resources, as I said. I want to thank you for joining us for today's presentation. I hope you found it useful. If there are other topics you would like me to cover as part of our webinar series, please feel free to reach out to me. My email address, again, is rduffy@acumatica.com. And again, I will share a blog with more of these resources. So with that, I'd like to wish you a good, secure, and private day, and look forward to having the opportunity to talk with you again on the next one of our sessions. Thank you and goodbye.